The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace,
As
as hundreds of people gathered behind the ornate iron gates. The air buzzed with anticipation and the distant sound of marching bands preparing for yet another royal ceremony. Among the crowd stood tourists with cameras ready, local Londoners who had seen countless processions, and royal enthusiasts who traveled from distant corners of the world just to catch a glimpse of Britain's monarchy in action. Standing at attention in the front row of the royal guard was James Whitmore, a young soldier whose polished boots reflected the morning light like mirrors. His red tunic was pressed to perfection, each gold button gleaming as if it had been polished just moments before. The tall bearskin hat on his head added to his already impressive height, making him appear almost larger than life. But beneath the ceremonial uniform and stoic expression, James carried a weight that no one in the crowd could see. James had served in the Royal Guard for 3 years now. It was a position of immense honor, one that his grandfather had held decades ago during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. His grandfather, William Whitmore, had passed away just 6 months earlier, leaving James with memories and a leather-bound journal filled with stories of duty, honor, and the true meaning of service. In those pages, William had written about the moments that tested a soldier's character, the times when following protocol clashed with following one's heart. The ceremony that morning was meant to honor Queen Camilla as she made her way to an important charity event. Protocol demanded that every guard salute as she passed, a gesture of respect for the crown and the institution they served. James had performed this duty hundreds of times before without hesitation, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of something his grandfather had written about in his final journal entry, something about true respect coming from genuine feeling rather than forced gesture. As the royal convoy approached, the crowd pressed closer to the gates, phones and cameras held high. The atmosphere was electric with excitement. Queen Camilla's car, a sleek black vehicle with the royal standard flying proudly, moved slowly along the designated route. Inside, she sat with practiced grace, acknowledging the crowds with measured waves and gentle smiles. The other guards stood perfectly still, their faces expressionless masks of discipline and training. This was what made the Royal Guard famous worldwide: their ability to remain completely motionless, regardless of what happened around them. Tourists often tried to make them laugh or react. But these soldiers were trained to be living statues, symbols of Britain's unwavering traditions. James felt his heart pounding beneath his red tunic. His mind drifted to a conversation he had overheard just days ago while standing guard outside one of the palace offices. Staff members had been discussing the Queen's upcoming visit to a veterans hospital, a place that cared for soldiers who had given everything for their country. What struck James wasn't the visit itself, but the passionate way Queen Camilla had apparently insisted on spending real time with each veteran, refusing to simply walk through 4 photographs. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. True royalty isn't about titles and crowns, boy. It's about what someone does when no cameras are watching. It's about service to others, especially those who can't repay you. The convoy was getting closer now. James could see the other guards preparing themselves, shoulders back, chins up, hands ready to move in perfect synchronization for the traditional salute. This was the moment everyone expected. This was what protocol demanded. This was what generations of royal guards had done without question. But James thought about his grandfather lying in that hospital bed, talking about a moment in his own service when he had to choose between following orders blindly and following his conscience. William had never revealed exactly what he had done, but he had made it clear that sometimes the greatest act of respect was to show genuine emotion rather than practiced ceremony. The black car was now directly in front of James's position. Through the window, he could see Queen Camilla clearly. She wasn't looking at the crowds with detachment or royal superiority. Instead, her eyes held a kindness that seemed genuine, a warmth that contradicted the cold formality most people expected from royalty. She noticed a young child in the crowd waving a small British flag, and her smile broadened. Not the practiced smile of public relations, but something that reached her eyes in that split second. James made his decision. While every other guard's hand moved sharply to their forehead in the traditional salute, James remained still. But it wasn't the stillness of defiance or disrespect. Instead, he slowly placed his right hand over his heart, holding it there firmly. His eyes, which should have stared straight ahead, seeing nothing, looked directly at the Queen with unmistakable respect and humanity. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like time had frozen. Some people in the crowd gasped. Others began whispering frantically. Pointing at James, the other guards maintained their salutes, but a few eyes flickered sideways, breaking their trained discipline to witness what their fellow soldier had just done. Queen Camilla's car slowed almost imperceptibly. Through the window, her expression changed. The practiced royal composure softened into something more personal. For just a moment, her hand moved to her own heart, mirroring James's gesture so subtly that only those truly watching would have noticed. Then the moment passed. The car continued forward, and the ceremony proceeded as planned. But something had shifted in the air, something that made the crowd fall into an unusual silence. Even the photographers seemed to pause, as if unsure whether they had witnessed a breach of protocol or something far more significant. James returned to his rigid stance, staring straight ahead as training demanded. His face remained expressionless, but inside, his heart raced with a mixture of fear and conviction. He had no idea what consequences awaited him. Breaking protocol as a royal guard was no small matter. He could face disciplinary action, dismissal, or worse. But as he stood there in the morning sun, he felt his grandfather's presence somehow, and he knew without doubt that he had made the right choice. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the whispers continued, spreading like wildfire through social media and messaging apps. What had just happened? Why had that guard done something different? What did it mean? Within minutes of the ceremony ending, videos and photographs of James's gesture had already begun circulating online. The internet moved fast, and this moment was too unusual, too charged with emotion to ignore. People from around the world started sharing the footage, each adding their own interpretation of what they had witnessed. Some commenters praised James for showing genuine humanity in a role, usually defined by rigid formality. Others criticized him harshly, claiming he had disrespected centuries of military tradition and the crown itself. The debate grew heated as more people weighed in, turning a simple gesture into a symbol of larger conversations about tradition, respect, and the modern monarchy. Back at the palace, James stood in a small waiting room, still in his full ceremonial uniform. His commanding officer, Colonel Davies, had summoned him immediately after the ceremony ended. The colonel was a stern man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a face carved by decades of military service. He represented everything traditional about the royal guard discipline, protocol, and unwavering adherence to established rules. James waited, his hands clasped behind his back, trying to steady his breathing. Through the window, he could see other guards conducting their duties as if nothing unusual had happened. Life in the palace continued with its usual precision and order. But for James, everything felt suspended, as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff waiting to see which way he would fall. The door opened, and Colonel Davies entered, followed by two other senior officers. Their expressions were unreadable, neutral masks that revealed nothing about the judgment they carried. Davies sat behind a large oak desk while the other officers remained standing. Flanking him like sentries, Guardsman Whitmore Davies began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through years of command. "I assume you understand why you've been called here." "Yes, sir," James replied, his voice steady, despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "What you did today was a deviation from established protocol," Davies continued, his eyes fixed on James with unwavering intensity. "The Royal Guard has maintained the same traditions for generations. These traditions exist for important reasons. They represent consistency, reliability, and respect for the institution we serve. When one soldier decides to act independently, regardless of his intentions, it undermines the entire foundation of what we do. Do you understand this?" "I understand, sir," James said. "But with respect?" I believe there's a difference between showing respect through routine and showing respect through genuine feeling. One of the other officers shifted uncomfortably. Such direct responses to superior officers were uncommon, potentially dangerous to a soldier's career. But James had made his choice, and he would stand by it with honesty. Davies leaned back in his chair, studying James with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been suppressed anger. "Your grandfather served in this very guard," he said, changing direction. "William Whitmore was an exemplary soldier. One knew him, actually, during my early years of service. He was a man of principle." James felt his throat tighten at the mention of his grandfather. "Yes, sir. He taught me that principle sometimes requires courage," indeed, Davies said quietly. "But courage in battle and courage in ceremony are very different things, guardsmen. What you did today has created quite a situation. Videos of your gesture are spreading across the internet. News organizations are calling for statements. Some people are calling you a hero. Others are calling for your dismissal. You've put us in a very difficult position." The room fell silent. James could hear the ticking of an old clock on the wall, each second stretching into eternity. He had known there would be consequences, but hearing them laid out so directly made the reality much more immediate and frightening. However, Davies continued, and James detected the slightest softening in his tone. "Before we make any decisions about your future with the Royal Guard, there's someone who wishes to speak with you." James's eyebrows rose slightly, the only break in his otherwise controlled expression. "Sir, you're to report to the West Wing in 20 minutes, Davies said, standing up. "You'll be meeting with Her Majesty's private secretary. It seems your gesture did not go unnoticed by the Queen herself." The words hit James like a physical blow. Queen Camilla had noticed. She had taken enough interest to request a meeting through her secretary. This could mean anything: a private reprimand, a formal disciplinary process, or perhaps something else entirely. As James left the office and walked through the palace corridors, his mind raced with possibilities. The West Wing was where the royal family conducted much of their private business, away from the ceremonial spaces tourists saw. The hallways here were quieter, more intimate, decorated with personal photographs and artwork, collected over generations. He passed staff members who glanced at him with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Word had clearly spread throughout the palace about what had happened. In an institution where everyone knew everyone else's business, privacy was a rare commodity. 20 minutes later, James found himself standing outside an elegant office with cream-colored walls and tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. A woman in her 40s, dressed professionally in a navy suit, opened the door and gestured for him to enter. Guardsman Whitmore. "I'm Eleanor Shaw, Her Majesty's private secretary," she said, her voice warm but professional. "Please sit down." James sat in a comfortable chair across from her desk, feeling oddly out of place in his full ceremonial uniform in such an intimate setting. Eleanor studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I've spent the last hour watching videos of this morning's ceremony from multiple angles," she said, pulling up her computer screen. "Your gesture has certainly captured people's attention. But what interests me more than the public reaction is understanding what motivated you to deviate from protocol." James took a deep breath. This was his chance to explain, to make them understand that his action came from respect, not disrespect. "Ma'am, my grandfather served in the Royal Guard before he passed away. He told me stories about true service, about the difference between going through motions and genuinely honoring someone. I've performed the traditional salute hundreds of times, but this morning, when I saw Her Majesty's genuine warmth toward the people, when I heard about her dedication to visiting veterans and truly spending time with them, I felt that a gesture from the heart would show more respect than following routine." Eleanor listened intently, making notes on a pad in front of her. So this was about respect, not rebellion. "Absolutely, ma'am," James said firmly. "I would never intentionally disrespect Her Majesty or the crown. My grandfather taught me that the monarchy's strength comes from its connection to people, from genuine service. I wanted to acknowledge that with genuine feeling." Eleanor nodded slowly, her expression revealing nothing about whether she accepted his explanation or not. Guardsman Whitmore. What you may not know is that Her Majesty has been advocating for years to modernize certain aspects of royal protocol. She believes strongly in authentic connection over empty formality. Your gesture, whether you intended it or not, has sparked a conversation she's been trying to have for quite some time. James's eyes widened slightly at Eleanor's words. The idea that Queen Camilla herself had been thinking about modernizing protocol, that his gesture might somehow align with her own beliefs, was completely unexpected. He had prepared himself for punishment, for lectures about tradition and discipline. This conversation was taking a direction he never could have imagined. "I had no idea, ma'am," James said honestly. "I acted on instinct and principle, not with any knowledge of Her Majesty's views on protocol." Eleanor smiled slightly, the first real warmth she had shown since the meeting began. "That's precisely what makes your actions so interesting, Guardsman. You weren't trying to make a political statement or challenge authority for the sake of rebellion. You were simply trying to show authentic respect. That authenticity is exactly what Her Majesty values most." She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the meticulously maintained gardens where tourists would never walk. "The monarchy faces unique challenges in the modern world," she continued, her voice thoughtful. "People want connection, authenticity, genuine emotion, yet we're bound by traditions that often emphasize distance and formality. It's a difficult balance to strike. Her Majesty understands this better than most people realize." James remained silent, sensing that Eleanor was building towards something important. In his training, he had learned to read situations, to understand when speaking was necessary and when silence served better. This was clearly a moment for listening. "What happened this morning has created an opportunity," Eleanor said, turning back to face him. "But it's also created complications. You understand that if we simply excuse your deviation from protocol without consequence, it could undermine military discipline. Other guards might feel empowered to make their own individual choices during ceremonies, which could lead to chaos." James nodded. "I understand, ma'am. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences are deemed appropriate." However, Eleanor continued, and James noticed the subtle emphasis on that word. "If we punish you harshly for an act that came from genuine respect, we send a message that authentic emotion has no place in royal service. That's not the message Her Majesty wants to send." She returned to her desk and picked up a folder, opening it to reveal several documents. "Here's what's going to happen, Guardsman Whitmore. You'll be temporarily reassigned from ceremonial duties while we conduct a formal review of this morning's events. This isn't a punishment, but rather a necessary process. During this time, you'll be assigned to work directly with the Royal Household's Veteran Support Program." James felt his heart skip. The Veterans Program was the very initiative Queen Camilla had been so passionate about. The one that had partly inspired his gesture. "Her Majesty specifically requested this assignment," Eleanor explained. "She wants you to see firsthand the work being done to support former service members, to understand why these connections matter so deeply to her. She also believes your perspective as a young guardsman might bring valuable insights to the program." The weight of this information settled over James like a blanket. What had started as a moment of personal conviction had somehow opened a door to something much larger. He wasn't being punished, he was being given an opportunity to contribute to meaningful work. "There's more," Eleanor said, her expression growing more serious. "The media attention around your gesture isn't going to disappear quickly. We'll need to manage this carefully. You'll be required to participate in one official interview, conducted by a royal correspondent, where you can explain your actions in your own words. This isn't optional. We need to control the narrative before it spirals into something neither you nor the crown can manage." James swallowed hard. An official interview meant putting himself in front of cameras, becoming a public figure in a way he had never intended or wanted. The Royal Guard's power came partly from their anonymity, their role as symbols rather than individuals. This would change everything. "I understand, ma'am," he said, though his voice betrayed some of his anxiety about this prospect. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I know this is overwhelming, Guardsman. You made a split-second decision based on your values, and now you're facing consequences you never anticipated. But I want you to understand something important. Her Majesty was genuinely moved by your gesture. She saw it not as a breach of protocol, but as a reminder of why these traditions exist in the first place, to show respect and honor, not just to mindlessly perform routines. She pulled out one more document from the folder. After your temporary reassignment and the interview, assuming everything goes well, you'll be eligible to return to ceremonial duties if you choose. However, you'll also have the option to transition into a different role within the royal household. One focused on modernizing how the Guard connects with the public while maintaining essential traditions. James felt his head spinning with all this information. An hour ago, he had been standing in Colonel Davies's office, expecting disciplinary action or dismissal. Now he was being offered opportunities that could reshape his entire career, potentially influence how the Royal Guard operated in the future. Why? He asked the question, escaping before he could stop himself. Why is Her Majesty taking such an interest in this? In me? Eleanor closed the folder and looked directly at James with an expression that mixed sympathy and understanding. Because Guardsman Whitmore, she knows what it's like to be judged for not fitting traditional expectations. She understands the courage it takes to be authentic when everyone expects you to simply play a role. Your gesture reminded her that respect can be shown in many ways, and that sometimes the most powerful gestures are the ones that come from genuine feeling rather than practiced routine. Indicating that the meeting was coming to an end. You'll report to Captain Morrison tomorrow morning at 8. He runs the Veteran Support Program and is expecting you. In the meantime, I'd suggest you prepare yourself mentally for what's ahead. Your life is about to change in ways you probably can't fully anticipate right now. James stood as well, his mind still processing everything he had heard. Ma'am, may I ask one more question? Of course. When I placed my hand over my heart, I saw Her Majesty mirrored the gesture, just briefly. Did that really happen, or did I imagine it? Eleanor smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her eyes. You didn't imagine it, Guardsman. Her Majesty has spent years learning to control her public expressions, to maintain the composure expected of royalty. But in that moment, your authentic gesture touched something real in her. She responded before her training could stop her. That's the power of genuine emotion. It can break through even the most carefully constructed facades. James left the office feeling like he was walking through a dream. The palace corridors that he had walked hundreds of times before seemed different now, charged with new possibility and new responsibility. Other staff members he passed looked at him with open curiosity, some with admiration, others with concern or disapproval. That evening, James sat in his small apartment on the palace grounds. Still wearing his uniform, though, the formal ceremony felt like it had happened weeks ago rather than hours. His phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from family, friends, and fellow guardsmen. Some messages were supportive, praising his courage and authenticity. Others were more cautious, warning him about the dangers of breaking tradition and suggesting he had put his career at risk. Unnecessarily. His mother had called 3 times, her voice a mixture of pride and worry. His father, a practical man who had worked in civil service his entire life, had been more measured in his response, reminding James that actions always carried consequences, intended or not. But it was the message from his grandmother that had made James's eyes watered. She had sent a simple text. Your grandfather would have been so proud of you today. He always said that true honor comes from the heart, not from following rules blindly. You showed the world what the Whitmore family stands for. James looked at his grandfather's journal, which sat on his small desk next to a framed photograph of William in his own Royal Guard uniform from decades ago. He opened the journal to the last entry, reading the words he had memorized, but needed to see again. James, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but I hope the lessons I've tried to teach you remain. Service to something greater than yourself is noble, but never let that service turn you into a machine. The day you stop feeling, the day you stop questioning whether your actions align with your values, that's the day you stop being truly human. The uniform doesn't make you a soldier, your character does. Remember that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is a quiet gesture that speaks louder than any salute ever could. James closed the journal carefully, running his hand over the worn leather cover. His grandfather had somehow known that James would face a moment like this, a choice between protocol and principle. The old man had prepared him without James even realizing it. The next morning, James reported to Captain Morrison as instructed. The Veterans Support Program offices were located in a less glamorous part of the palace complex, away from the grand ceremonial spaces. The hallways here were simpler, more functional. But they carried a different kind of energy, one of purpose and genuine care. Captain Morrison was a man in his early 50s, with kind eyes and a slight limp from an old injury sustained during active combat duty. He greeted James with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "Guardsman Whitmore," he said warmly. "Or should I say the young man who's got all of Britain talking this morning. Come in, sit down. We have much to discuss." James entered the office, which was lined with photographs of veterans, letters from families, and certificates of appreciation from various military organizations. This was clearly someone who had dedicated his life to helping others after his own service had ended. "Sir, I want you to know that I'm honored to be assigned here. Even if the circumstances are unusual," James said sincerely. Morrison waved a hand dismissively. "Unusual circumstances often lead to extraordinary outcomes, Guardsman. Her Majesty personally called me yesterday evening to tell me about you. She spoke highly of what you did, said it reminded her why this program matters so much. That's not a conversation I expected to have, I'll tell you that." He pulled out a folder similar to the one Eleanor had shown James the day before. "Here's what you need to understand about this program. We work with veterans who are struggling with transition to civilian life, dealing with physical injuries, mental health challenges, financial difficulties, or simply feeling forgotten by the society they once served. Many of them have given everything for their country and feel like they've received nothing in return." James listened intently as Morrison explained the various initiatives, counseling services, job placement programs, housing assistance, and regular social events where veterans could connect with each other and with members of the royal household who genuinely cared about their well-being. "Majesty visits these veterans regularly," Morrison continued. "Not for photo opportunities or official engagements, but genuine visits where she sits with them, listens to their stories, holds their hands when they cry, laughs with them when they share funny memories. She sees them as people, not as props for royal PR. That's why your gesture meant so much to her. You saw her the same way as a person deserving of genuine respect, not just protocol." Over the following days, James immersed himself in the work of the Veterans Program. He met men and women who had served in conflicts around the world, who carried physical and emotional scars that would never fully heal. He heard stories of courage and sacrifice that put his own concerns about career and protocol into sharp perspective. One veteran in particular, a man named Thomas, who had lost both legs in an explosion, made a profound impact on James. Thomas was in his 70s now, his military service dating back decades. But his memories remained vivid and painful. "The hardest part wasn't the physical injury," Thomas told James during one of their conversations. "It was feeling like I had become invisible after I left service. People would thank me for my service with empty words, but nobody really wanted to know what it meant, what it cost. Until I met Her Majesty through this program." Thomas's eyes grew distant with memory. "She came to visit us last year, sat with each of us individually. When she got to me, she didn't just shake my hand and move on. She sat down, looked me in the eyes, and asked me to tell her about the friends I lost in that explosion. Most people avoid that topic, but she wanted to know. She wanted to understand. We talked for almost an hour. That's when I knew she was different from what people say about her." James felt his conviction about his gesture strengthen with each conversation, each story he heard. These veterans understood the difference between hollow gestures and genuine care. They had spent their lives seeing through pretense and protocol to recognize authentic humanity. The day of his official interview arrived faster than James had anticipated. The royal correspondent, a respected journalist named Victoria Ashford, had been chosen specifically because of her reputation for fairness and her deep knowledge of military traditions. The interview would be conducted in a private room within the palace and would be broadcast that evening across major news networks. James sat in the makeup chair, while a stylist prepared him for the cameras. A surreal experience for someone who had spent years training to be invisible and unremarkable. Victoria reviewed her notes nearby, occasionally glancing at James with an expression that seemed more curious than judgmental. "Nervous?" she asked, as they prepared to begin filming. "Terrified," James admitted honestly. "I'm used to standing still and being silent, not explaining myself to millions of people." Victoria smiled warmly. "Just speak from your heart, the way you acted from your heart during that ceremony. People respond to authenticity, guardsman. That's why your gesture resonated with so many people. They're tired of seeing people go through motions without meaning." The cameras began rolling, and Victoria introduced this segment with context about the ceremony, the viral videos, and the public debate that had erupted about tradition versus modernity in the monarchy. Then she turned to James with her first question. "Guardsman Whitmore, in your own words, can you tell us what you were thinking in the moment you chose to place your hand over your heart instead of performing the traditional salute?" James took a deep breath before the camera, letting his genuine feelings show instead of hiding behind military discipline. He spoke about his grandfather, who had served in the Royal Guard decades earlier, and taught him that respect meant more than following routines. It required genuine feeling and recognition of someone's true character. "I saw Her Majesty passing by. I thought about everything I had learned about her dedication to veterans and her genuine care for people who have served this country." James explained to interviewer Victoria, "I wanted to show respect that came from my heart, not just from my training." When Victoria questioned whether his actions undermined the Royal Guard's important traditions, James responded thoughtfully. He emphasized his tremendous respect for traditions and the generations of guardsmen who maintain them, but argued that traditions should serve a purpose beyond merely existing. They should connect people to deeper values, honor, respect, and genuine care for others. His gesture wasn't meant to reject tradition, but to honor what traditions represent. The interview continued for 20 minutes, covering military discipline, the balance between tradition and modernity, and what James hoped people would understand about his actions. He remained honest and thoughtful throughout, never defensive, yet never apologetic for following his conscience. James's demeanor brightened when discussing his current assignment to the Veterans Program. He spoke passionately about the people he had met and Queen Camilla's genuine commitment to former service members. "Working with these veterans has shown me exactly why authentic connection matters so much," he explained. "These are people who have given everything for their country. What they need most isn't empty gestures or meaningless ceremonies. They need to feel seen, heard, and valued as individuals." After the cameras stopped, Victoria praised his performance. "You spoke with real conviction and intelligence. I think people are going to respond very positively to what you said." That evening, James watched the broadcast surrounded by supportive friends from the Guard. His phone buzzed with messages, but this time the tone was markedly different. Fellow Guardsmen expressed pride in his representation of their service. Veterans nationwide sent messages thanking him for highlighting the importance of genuine care and respect. Even skeptical officers sent brief notes, acknowledging he had handled the difficult situation with grace and maturity. The public response on social media was overwhelmingly positive. People shared their own stories about times when authentic gestures meant more than formal protocols. Parents discussed teaching their children the difference between going through motions and acting with genuine feeling. Teachers used James's story as an example of having courage to follow one's convictions. Despite potential consequences, 3 days after the interview aired, Eleanor Shaw appeared at the Veterans Center, where James was working. "Guardsman Whitmore," she said with a smile, "Her Majesty would like to see you." James's heart jumped. He had not had direct contact with Queen Camilla since the ceremony, though he knew she had been following his progress through regular reports. Eleanor led him through the palace to a private sitting room, smaller and more intimate than the grand ceremonial spaces, decorated with personal photographs and comfortable furniture that suggested this was where the royal family actually lived. Queen Camilla stood by the window in a simple dress, rather than formal royal attire. When she turned to greet James, her expression was warm and genuine. She poured tea for both of them, a surprisingly normal gesture, that reminded James that underneath all the titles and ceremonies, she was simply a person. "I want to thank you," she began sincerely, "for your gesture during the ceremony and for everything that has followed. I know the past week has been challenging for you, facing scrutiny and uncertainty about your future. That takes considerable courage." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your Majesty, I should be thanking you for not viewing my action as disrespectful, for giving me the opportunity to work with the Veterans Program, for understanding what I was trying to express." She smiled softly. "Do you know what I saw when you placed your hand over your heart that morning? I saw my late father-in-law, Prince Philip. He was a man who respected tradition deeply, but never let protocol prevent him from being genuine. He taught me that the monarchy's strength comes not from distance and formality, but from real connection with people. Your gesture reminded me of that lesson." She paused before continuing. "I've spent years in this role trying to balance respect for tradition with the need for authenticity. People often see me as someone who simply appeared in the royal family, not understanding the years of work and genuine care I've tried to bring to this position. When you showed me that gesture, when you looked at me with real respect rather than practiced formality, it meant more than you could possibly know." James listened intently, seeing a vulnerability in the Queen that the public rarely witnessed. This was a woman who had faced criticism and doubt, who had worked hard to prove herself worthy of her position. "Your work with the Veterans Program has been exceptional," she continued. "Captain Morrison tells me you've connected with the veterans in ways that showed genuine empathy and understanding. Thomas, in particular, speaks very highly of you. He said you actually listened to his stories, that you don't just go through the motions of caring." The Queen set down her teacup and leaned forward. "I've been working for some time on an initiative to modernize certain aspects of how the royal guard and royal household interact with the public. Not abandoning tradition, but evolving it to reflect the values those traditions were meant to embody. Your gesture, and the positive public response to it, has given this initiative new momentum." James felt his pulse quicken as she continued. "I would like you to be part of this initiative. After your temporary assignment ends, you would have the option to join a new position we're creating, a liaison between the Royal Guard and various community programs, including the Veterans Support Initiative. You would help train other guards in understanding the deeper purpose behind their service. Help them see beyond protocol to the human connections that make this work meaningful." Offer stunned James. This wasn't just about returning to his previous duties or advancing his career. This was about fundamentally changing how future generations of royal guards would understand their role and purpose. "Your Majesty, I'm deeply honored," he managed to say. "I never imagined that my actions would lead to something like this." "The best changes often come from unexpected moments," the Queen replied with a knowing smile. "From people who have the courage to act on their convictions, even when they don't know what consequences might follow. You showed that respect and tradition aren't opposites. They can work together when guided by genuine values." They talked for another half hour about the proposed initiative, the challenges it might face from traditionalists, and the opportunities it could create for building stronger connections between the monarchy and the people it served. James was struck by the Queen's intelligence, her thoughtful approach to change, and her genuine commitment to making the royal institution more relevant and connected to modern Britain. As the meeting drew to a close, the Queen walked James to the door. Before opening it, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "James, I want you to know something. When I mirrored your gesture that morning, when I placed my hand over my heart in response, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was pure instinct, a genuine response to genuine emotion. For someone in my position, those moments of unguarded authenticity are rare. You gave me that gift, even if only for a second. Thank you." James felt tears threatening to form, but maintained his composure. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for seeing what I meant, for understanding, and for this incredible opportunity." As he stepped into the hallway, she added one final thought. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you. I never met William Whitmore, but I've heard stories about him from older staff members. They say he was a man who understood that true service comes from the heart. That legacy lives on in you." James left feeling transformed. The young guardsman who had made a split-second decision to follow his heart weeks ago had never imagined where that choice would lead. He had expected consequences, perhaps punishment, possibly the end of his career. Instead, he had found purpose, opportunity, and the profound satisfaction of knowing his actions had contributed to meaningful change. 6 months had passed since James Whitmore placed his hand over his heart instead of performing the traditional salute. That single moment of authentic emotion had blossomed into a movement reshaping how Britain's military traditions connected with modern values. James now split his time between guard duties and his new role as liaison coordinator for the Royal Guards community engagement programs. The position was created 3 months after his meeting with Queen Camilla. Following extensive discussions with military leadership and community organizations, the program started small, with James working with carefully selected guards, interested in deepening their understanding of service beyond ceremonial duties. These guardsmen volunteered at veteran centers, participated in outreach programs, and learned to see their role as representatives of values extending beyond palace gates. The response was remarkable. Guardsmen, initially skeptical, found themselves profoundly moved by direct interaction with veterans and community members. They began understanding that their uniforms and traditions carried meaning far beyond tourism and pageantry, representing continuity, stability, and connection to generations of service and sacrifice. On a crisp autumn morning, James prepared materials in a palace conference room for his largest training session yet. 20 volunteer guards, eager to learn. Captain Morrison, who had become both supervisor and mentor, entered carrying coffee. 20 shows that something real is happening here, Morrison said. When we started, we hoped for maybe 5 or 6 participants. James felt both pride and nervous energy. I never imagined that single moment would lead to all this. Morrison replied thoughtfully, real change doesn't come from grand plans or official mandates. It comes from individuals making choices that reflect their deepest values, even when those choices carry risk. You took that risk, and now others are inspired. The guards filed in with expressions mixing curiosity, enthusiasm, and uncertainty. James began by sharing his story, not glossing over the fear he felt when deviating from protocol. He wanted them to understand that authentic service sometimes required courage. The traditional salute has centuries of history, James explained. I'm not saying it's wrong. But when gestures become purely automatic, performed without connection to their deeper meaning, they lose their power. A young guard named David asked, how do we balance maintaining discipline with authentic connection? They might conflict sometimes. They don't have to conflict, James replied. The most meaningful discipline comes from understanding why you're doing something. When you truly understand that your role represents centuries of service, your discipline becomes stronger because it's rooted in genuine conviction. The 3-hour session included stories from veterans, videos of community programs, and discussions about how military service connected to broader concepts of duty, honor, and compassion. During a break, an older guard named Michael approached privately. A 15-year veteran, respected for dedication and professionalism, his participation had surprised many who viewed him as traditional. When I first saw the video of what you did, I was angry, Michael admitted. But then I watched your interview and thought about my grandfather, who served in World War II. He told me that medals and ceremonies meant nothing if you forgot why you were serving. Your gesture reminded me of his words. James felt deeply moved. Thank you for being open enough to reconsider your initial reaction. That takes real integrity. Michael continued, I have a 7-year-old son. I want him to see that his father's service means something beyond standing in a fancy uniform. This program gives me a way to show him that service is about caring for others. That afternoon, James accompanied guards to the Veterans Center. Thomas, the elderly veteran who had lost his legs decades ago, was eager to share wisdom with the new generation. The guards listened to stories of combat, sacrifice, loss, and resilience. When one young guard fought back tears during a moving story, Thomas placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. It's okay to feel, son. That's what separates good soldiers from great ones. Great soldiers never forget that behind every uniform is a human being. Never be ashamed of your empathy. Queen Camilla made an unexpected appearance. She had rearranged her schedule to meet this new group on their first day. She spoke individually with veterans and guards, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently. "How is our pioneer doing?" she asked James warmly. "Learning every day, Your Majesty. These guards are inspiring." The Queen glanced around at guards conversing with veterans. "This is what I envisioned when we discussed modernizing our approach to service." "You've made this vision real, James." Before leaving, Queen Camilla addressed everyone. "There are people who believe tradition and authenticity cannot coexist. But seeing you engaged in real conversation and mutual respect, I know that's not true. The strongest traditions serve deeper human values: respect, honor, compassion, and recognition of our shared humanity." Guardsman Whitmore showed us that a gesture from the heart can be more powerful than a practiced routine. Each of you is continuing that work, building bridges between tradition and authenticity. This is the future of what service to the crown truly means. The applause was enthusiastic and heartfelt. James noticed tears in veterans' eyes, men and women who had felt forgotten by the institutions they served. This validation from the Queen was profoundly meaningful. That evening, James pulled out his grandfather's journal. He picked up a pen and wrote on the first blank page following William's final entry. "Grandfather, 6 months ago, I made a choice that changed my life. You taught me that true honor comes from the heart, and I finally understood. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act according to your values when you're terrified. I've learned that tradition gains strength when it serves human connection. And I've learned that one person's authentic action can inspire others to find their own courage. Thank you for preparing me. I hope I'm making you proud." His phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Shaw, the Queen's private secretary. "James, Her Majesty would like you to participate in planning the Remembrance Day ceremony next month. She wants to incorporate elements that honor both tradition and authentic connection. Are you available tomorrow morning?" James smiled, feeling excitement and purpose. Remembrance Day was one of Britain's most solemn ceremonies. That his insights might help shape it was both humbling and thrilling. The path hadn't been easy. There had been criticism from traditionalists, moments of doubt, and administrative challenges. But there had been profound rewards connections with veterans like Thomas, satisfaction watching other guards discover deeper purpose, and the privilege of contributing to institutional change. As James prepared for bed, he thought about the guards he had trained. Their enthusiasm and willingness to embrace a vision of service extending beyond ceremonial duties. These people would carry this work forward, continuing to build bridges between tradition and modernity, protocol and genuine human connection. The journey that began with a hand placed over a heart had become something far larger. It had become a movement, a shift in how an ancient institution understood its purpose and relationship to the people it served. At the center was a simple but profound truth his grandfather had taught, that the most powerful gestures, the most meaningful service, comes not from following rules without thought, but from acting with genuine conviction and authentic feeling. As James drifted off to sleep, he felt his grandfather's presence, a sense of approval transcending the boundary between life and death. William Whitmore had served with honor and passed that legacy to his grandson. Now James was passing it forward to a new generation, ensuring that the true meaning of service, compassion, authenticity, genuine respect for human dignity would continue guiding those who wore the uniform long after he was gone.